Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. We are back on the dev server, and it's time to have a look at a new premium that's coming in for the Soviets. This is the T-80UD, and basically what it is a T-80U, which has access to a different engine, which actually kind of hurts it quite aggressively. If you've seen the standard T-80U, which is this one right here, it's obviously quite different because it has access to a bunch of different stuff. But looking at the UD, it looks really similar, but its internals are incredibly different. So, first of all, the most obvious thing is the fact that it doesn't have access to this cool camo that I have, but the, the main one is the booty. So, whereas the T-80U has this 1250 horsepower gas turbine engine, and also this transmission, which means that it can go forward at good acceleration, and also reverse at great acceleration too, compared to a lot of other Soviet tanks, the T-80UD has a 1000 horsepower diesel engine, which means that it can't do either of those things. So instead you're limited in the maximum speed and also a pretty rough acceleration, and then also on top of that you have a terrible reverse, which is very similar to a lot of other Soviet vehicles at these BRs. So that's some huge factors that make this thing a lot worse already than the T-80U. The other one is the gun. The gun itself is exactly the same. So 6.5 seconds on the reload. This is a 2A46M1 cannon. The T-80U has the 2A46M1 cannon. But this also has access to the 3BM46, which is a really nice round. You know, it pens up to 308mm, where the T-80UD only gets access to the 3BM42, which only pens up to 264. So this is actually the same round, which is the top round on the terms, which is the exact same BR as the T-80UD at this moment in time. They do get access to the same missile, but if we're honest, not many people use that missile because it's not very good compared to the APFSDS. So that's how that goes. The other thing that the T-80UD is missing is thermals. There is no thermals on this vehicle, only NVDs, and, you know, that doesn't make a huge difference nowadays compared to the fact that, you know, they removed a lot of night battles for a lot of BRs, but because this thing is at 10.0, you can actually see night battles in it, which kind of sucks. The 12.7 is the same, the 7.62mm is the same, it gets 8 smoke grenades, which is quite nice. It also gets quite a lot of contact 5 on it, meaning that you have protection against chemical, but also kinetic rounds too. Then you have a little bit on the side as well. You have the same autoloader, which has 28 pieces in it. You have, of course, the ammo at the back of the turret and the big old breech. So in terms of Soviet vehicles, this is a very standard Soviet vehicle. And the sad thing about it is, as a person who really likes the T-80 series, had a great time in the T-80U, had a great time in the T-80B, and also the T-80BVM. This one doesn't feel as good because one of the big factors of the T-80 over a lot of the other Soviet vehicles is its mobility, and this one's mobility is nowhere near as good as a lot of the other ones that are sat around the place. It would be kind of nice if this thing's mobility was better, but that's obviously the limiting factor for it. It doesn't have great gun depression, so that's also another thing that isn't great on it, but it does have okay targeting speed compared to a lot of the other Soviet vehicles, and isn't limited in a lot of other ways because of that. It still has the really good reload, it still has the laser rangefinder, still has all of those different things, and also joins a lot of other rank 7s for premiums for the Soviets. You got the 2S38, the terms of course, the BMP-2M as the squadron vehicle, but this one is another GE premium that they're bringing in for some weird reason. I got a feeling that this thing might go up in BR at some point, even though it doesn't have as much mobility. If you compare this to a lot of other vehicles around this BR, it does have a lot of factors that make it a lot better in general ways. So what we're going to do is obviously have a look at its mobility, since we know all of the other stats on it. Everything else has been seen on other vehicles and has kind of been used on other vehicles, so there's no reason why it would be any different on this vehicle, and that means you're looking at, you know, a kind of 10.3, 10.7 standard for this when it doesn't have thermals. So let's see what the mobility is about. What is the reason why this thing is struggling so much? Oh, why is it 10-0, I think is probably a better question. And you can see with the vehicle, it really isn't that unmobile. You know, like it's obviously not at the same standard as the T-80, which you don't really expect it to be, but it's not exactly slow. Like if you compare this to the M60, you know, the M60-2000, which they just added, this thing is a lot faster. It doesn't have access to the thermals though, which should be noted. It does have the low profile of the T-80, which is quite nice, and also at the same time, you know, it shouldn't have as many technical issues as the other one, but luckily in game we don't have to worry about that stuff. The gun itself is still good, you know, the smoke grenades are still useful, the vehicle overall will still do very well, and I'm kind of surprised that it's actually at the BR that it is, because of the fact that it can still motor and just not as fast as the standard T-80. Like, I feel like this thing will go up in BR, just because it's not crazy slow. The major issue is the reverse, but this is the same problem on the T-72s and also on the T-90. And the T-90M, which was just added, is obviously quite a high BR compared to this thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if this one goes up. It does feel like it's in a pretty decent position overall, and hopefully, you know, they do see kind of light of day. But then again, if you have a look at 10-0, you have of course the 2S38, a vehicle which, if you just look at its base stats, should be a lot higher than it actually is. So maybe this is just going to be that lineup for the Soviets which gets away with murder and instead is able to pretty much rule the roost when it really shouldn't be allowed to. The vehicle has the 3-man crew, since it is a standard Soviet vehicle, and it does have access to a commander view, which is quite nice. And the only things it's lacking are, I suppose, things that would help a lot of premium players, you know, stuff like thermals and other stuff. But at the same time, you know, it's still going to be a good vehicle. It's still going to be a T-80 with just slightly less forward momentum, but a pretty decent gun with a 3BM42, which is also a pretty good round. I know a lot of people are down on these vehicles just because they have some weird factors about them, and also because other nations have been buffed quite a lot over the last period of time, but this one is still powerful. It can still do work, and it can still do a lot on the battlefield. I think this is a pretty solid pickup. The only real question is, do you pick this up, or do you pick up the 2S38, which has, you know, that kind of multi-role capability, and has a bit of fun going through it as well. It really depends on what you're looking for, I suppose. If you want a more standard vehicle, if you want a more standard setup, you obviously take something like this. If you want the 2S38 to give you something slightly different, and give you something a little bit more interesting, and obviously that's there for you too. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.
I'd like to thank Schnitzel Stroker, Brendan Quinn, Vilneus, Character Fuel, Carrion Crow, Nicholas Richardson, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, B. Young, Opium Prime, Masonocrat, Lafouche, Alan Hacker, Sem Arslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.